Welcome in to the DNVR Rockies podcast. Still going strong in the postseason, off-season for the Rockies. Still going strong thanks to Strava Craft Coffee. And you've got to be able to use that promo code DNVR20 because when you do, you get 20% off your entire purchase of that CBD-infused, deliciously rich, and potentially life-altering Strava Craft Coffee. I am your host, Drew Creasman. I am the managing editor of DNVR Rockies. With me, as always, is beat writer Patrick Lyons. And on this episode, we got to discuss what's going on inside the world of baseball. Just give our thoughts on what is happening out there, Patrick, because it's a lot. There's been a great deal of baseball. There have been some big surprises already, some big moments in this postseason, more stuff from a few old friends, a couple of big topics, including one I wanted to weigh in on when it comes to Hall of Fame and particularly catchers. And you obviously know the specific person we're going to get into there. But Patrick, the title of this episode, now I think fairly so, the topic, a question I can't believe we're asking, I can't believe I would ever ask before, but is a fair one, which is too much baseball a bad thing?
No. There's no such thing as too much baseball.
Good night, everyone.
Though, there we go. We're done. We covered it. Though I do think there is, such a thing as not being able to focus in on the most important parts of baseball when every part of baseball is important. So yesterday, of course, there were 8 games, the first time in the history of the postseason, not because the teams this year did something so extraordinary that baseball said, shoot, you know what? You guys are so fantastic. We're just going to blow up the rules right here in the middle of this for no particular reason, just because this is so amazing. No, it had to do with, creating a bubble situation. And, if the season was 3 weeks long, they could justify saying, well, you know what, shoot, if we bring 16 teams into the playoffs, we take them down to Arizona in a bubble or Florida, whatever it may be. You know what, 16 of those 30 teams that did really well for those 3 weeks, we're going to have some of the best teams in there. We might not have all of them. We'll have enough that it'll justify this new bubble situation. As it were, they got through the whole season, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And because of that, we have a new series, a new round of games, whereas previously it was a wild card game for one team to be in that final 4 in the AL or NL. And this year they just opened up and said, well, shoot, let's just have a whole wild card round, a wild card series. So there were 8 games, 4 in the AL, 4 in the NL. There's 3 or 4 going on at the same time. And I think it was a little overwhelming in a lot of ways. Yeah. You wanted to stop and watch and say, I just want to focus right now on Atlanta and Cincinnati. They're scoreless through 12, 13 innings. It was rather historic, and with other games going on, you're flipping back and forth a little bit. So no, there's no such thing as too much baseball, but I do think, viewers and hardcore baseball fans didn't really get a chance to absorb all of it in that moment.
Yeah. I've always been a big proponent of, it's a game of nuance. It's a game of the little things that you only get the most out of the game when you can sit through every pitch of the at-bat and all the little things that happen in between and all the things that you and I talk about, as well as anybody out there watching the game, whether you're sitting down at the DNVR bar, you're at your house with your friends, your family, that if you're really, really into the game, you're talking about there's never a quiet moment, right? There's always something going on. What pitch you think he's going to go with here? Do you see how far that guy is off of there? Do you notice that shift here? Who's that warming up in the bullpen there? Oh, did you see the third baseman moved in a little bit after 2 strikes, or he moved back a little bit? Oh, do you think they're playing it? What do you think about the bunt here? I don't know if you'd let him go with it. All game long, every situation, and then after each pitch, you do it all again, right? So when you're trying to watch 8 games at a time, whereas I feel like that's the only way to watch football. Sorry, and I don't dislike football, especially not the sport. I struggle sometimes with the NFL, but football is a game I've always very much enjoyed, and it's still like you got to red zone that thing, man. You got to hop around. There's so much dead time, but And I know people feel that way about baseball, but I just have a very hard time watching baseball this way. So I'm with you. Like, we've talked about our philosophical differences with doing this on the regular, like why it just doesn't get you the best baseball product at the end of the day. But it's completely overwhelming to me. It's just like, I just want to sit with one game and one set of announcers and one storyline or group of storylines, because there's a million storylines in one baseball game that you can follow. So trying to keep track of, now multiply that by 8, and it's just like my brain hurts. I can't remember who. I also get stuff mixed up a lot, right? Because it's like the count in that game. Was it 2-2 on that guy, or was it 2? No, he was in a 1-2 count, so I thought he was going to throw the fastball. And then everything's jumbled up in my brain, and I'm like, I got to pick one.
You want to focus on one game at a time. Do you want to have one set of announcers for one day at a time? Because also those that tuned into ESPN got 10 hours of coverage of Matt Vasgersian, Alex Rodriguez.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it was wild. Red Zone is the perfect example where that's how you should watch football, I think, in a lot of ways. And there's not as many things going on. There's those dead moments in between plays. I don't think there's as much conversation going on in between plays in football when you're watching the game, because there's so many other things going on. It's like the action of the play is the only thing happening, and then when it stops, everything stops.
Right.
And you're just waiting for the next one.
The head coach and the coordinator are making the decision on what play to call, and everybody else is like just hanging out, waiting to be told where to go and what to do.
They get in a huddle. So they get in a group. Guys, let's just hang out for a second. Let's catch our breath. Let's just do something together, or we're all going to do this play. All right, let's go do the play and do the play.
Coordinated clap.
I didn't play past Pop Warner, so that's how I remember it. But baseball is not that. But baseball's not that kind of game. I think I was thinking of this today about why for so long baseball was America's national pastime. It's not anymore. But why it got that name, and it the first ever game had its roots in Manhattan, in the hustle and bustle of Manhattan. They said, well, you know what? We need to get away from this. We need to maybe kind of get back to our roots. And so they took a boat over to Hoboken, New Jersey, and they played a game in Elysian Fields, the New York Knickerbocker Club. And so they got away from, again, the craziness of the city, and they played a slow, pastoral game where they could have conversation in between, have snacks in between. I don't know what the daily regimen was of ball players at that time, but the game it started out slow. It still is that way. The game hasn't changed. And as you said, you're having conversations about, what should happen on this play, and what's going to be the next strategy. Let's look ahead to the next inning, because it lays out that way very, linearly in a sense. Whereas you can't say, well, what are the Patriots going to do, in the third quarter here? Well, it's the beginning of the second half. What happens in the third quarter will be dictated on what's happened.
Right. 2 pick sixes in the next 10 minutes. Game is a completely different thing, right?
Precisely. So I think, not being able to kind of, give baseball, your undivided attention was a slight, shame. But at the same time, there was just enough really good baseball on that. Yeah, you may have missed every single pitch in Atlanta, Cincinnati, but you made up for it for Oakland and Chicago. If you stayed up to watch the Yankees Cleveland game, that went on for nearly 5 hours. It was the longest game in history, period. We're not talking playoffs. We're talking we're talking baseball, like regular season, postseason. It was nearly 5 hours, and to think that it didn't involve the Dodgers is kind of crazy. But
yes, yeah.
But nevertheless, and so there's all these storylines again with players being on different teams. It was, the state of Ohio really got stung because you had Giovanni Urshela, who came up with Cleveland as a third baseman. They eventually let him go. He's caught fire now at the Yankees, goes and hits a grand slam to tie the game. Earlier today, on Thursday, when we're recording this, at a point in which Atlanta pretty much had already wrapped up the game against Cincinnati, former Reds outfielder Adam Duvall crushed a 2-run home run. So the state of Ohio totally wiped out in a 24-hour period. Pretty tough if you're from the Buckeye State.
I was saying, they got bucked in the eye, man.
They did. But there's like you said, there's all these interesting stories. Yesterday we touched on some Rockies players kind of doing some things, getting it done. There were a lot of ex-Padres players getting it done. Not Padres players themselves, because they lost.
Right. That's right.
A lot of ex-Padres players. You saw Josh Naylor doing it really big, seeing that kid hit that double and just fired up. And even if you're not a lip reader, you know what that one syllable word was.
Yeah,
I think you did. So it was an exciting day of baseball, and I don't know we'll ever have it again, and that's okay.
Right. What a wonderful way to be able to put it. I'm so glad you said it that way, because like not everything has to be a fight. There doesn't have to be a negative takeaway. So just the fact that we don't want to see this again doesn't mean that we aren't incredibly thrilled that we got to see it now. And that's an okay place to be. Also an okay place to be is on your DraftKings Sportsbook app, where you can make yourself a little extra dough, a little extra cash. You can make your sports watching experience that much more fun because you've got a little bit of skin in the game. It can make it a lot of fun, and you don't have to go crazy with it either. You throw a few bucks here or there, you find some fun odds, you sit back and watch, and you go, hey, maybe you make a little extra dough. You do that a few times. Suddenly they start throwing money at you just so you can, again, take a flyer on whatever you feel like might be working for you out there. They still got that fantastic deal going on over there in the NFL, where if you are a new user and you use that promo code DNVR, they'll hook you up with a $1 bet to win $100. All you got to do is pick a team to win, not cover a point spread or score a certain number of touchdowns or do any of this nonsense. They got to win the football game. You bet $1, you walk away with $100. That's for new users who use that promo code DNVR over there at the DraftKings Sportsbook app. You must be 21 or older, Colorado only. Profit boost terms and conditions and eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. And if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
And I will follow that up with your DraftKings pick of the week. Lock it in now, because the rates might end up changing. And it's for a game that we're not going to see until next week, believe it or not, because a lot of the American League is already wrapped up. And that is the Yankees and Rays series. I'm not sure if that one's in LA or San Diego, but it will be in California. I know that. California. Where the Yankees and Rays should play naturally.
Of course.
Well, actually, to be fair, for Tampa's home games, they should be in San Diego or LA.
May as well. That's hilarious. But I don't know if I ever said I really liked the way they did that. You laid it all out the other day in one of the podcasts why they did that, and I don't know that I ever fully said. I think that was brilliant to make them play in non-familiar parks, to make it a totally even playing field as best they could, considering the bubble. I think they handled that. For everything else that Major League Baseball has not handled well this season, that, and we've got to say, COVID never turned into a total disaster in 2020. The season never got shut down early on, Patrick. I know you and I were having a lot of conversations, off air going, they might not be able to pull this thing off. And they did, and they did relatively well. So tip of the cap to Major League Baseball for getting through this thing, and the absolute best that could have been hoped for.
And I'm sure we'll touch on it again, because the Rockies and what they did, their entire, public relations staff and how they were able to treat us in the press box was just A+, top of the line, super classy, set up and everything. We felt very safe. I know I did. I know you did. We went out there plenty of times. They had all the safety precautions there, and it was really impressive. So hats off to them. But if we're talking about the American League playoffs and the second round, which is now the divisional series, Yankees and Rays, I didn't think the Yankees were going to get past Cleveland in the first round. And I figured if they did, all bets were off. Once they got past that hurdle, much like with Minnesota, who has now apparently not won a series since, Kirby Puckett, Kent Herbeck, and Gary Gaetti were on the Minnesota Twins. But Had they
All-Star Kirby Puckett.
but had they, been able to get past Houston, you go, okay, finally they got rid of that little curse that they seem to be plagued by right now, and they're going to go on to have success. Well, they got knocked out. We'll never know. But I think the Yankees are going to continue to keep rolling. I think Tampa might be a slightly better team, slightly. Now, if maybe this is what we talk about next, the idea that the top 5 Rockies players are better than the top 5 Tampa Bay Rays players.
Right.
However, the next 5, the edge
Right.
goes to Tampa. The next 5 goes to Tampa, et cetera, on down the line. As I said yesterday, they had like 20 guys with positive WAR. So they're just loaded, and the Yankees are always loaded, even when you have guys that just really aren't producing. Out of nowhere, they can produce. Gary Sanchez did it in game 2 with a 3-run, or actually in game 1, excuse me, even though Kyle Higashioka was Garrett Cole's guy, he was his caddy. No, Boone went with Gary Sanchez, and Gary Sanchez produced because he's not wearing the pinstripes, but he's wearing New York across his gray uniform. So I think they're going to continue that mojo. And so my DraftKings pick of the week is going to be the New York Yankees to win that series against Tampa. Right now it's -148. I think it's probably going to increase. So get in on that now so you can get your best possible payout. DraftKings Sportsbook pick of the week, Yankees over Rays in the division series.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick. And you're right, man. Like over the course of 162, all that depth will really play out. And when other teams are on their 4th and 5th starter, or they're banged up, or they've got 3 guys in their bullpen who aren't available, and you could just keep throwing dudes out there, you're going to be one of the better teams in baseball, and you're going to do so consistently. And the Rays have been that. But in a 5-game set where you're not going to see anybody's 4th or 5th game starter, and you're not going to see anybody's middle of the rotation guys ever, and middle of the bullpen guys ever, and you're a guy like Aaron Judge or DJ LeMahieu, or a suddenly hot Gary Sanchez can win you a game, which can win you a series when you have the singular talents like that, or Garrett Cole, who can shut you down and just win a ball game by himself. And so that, of course, the Yankees have depth as well, but they also have that superstar talent that can win you individual games in that moment. And that's what we've seen. Bieber had been the best pitcher in the American League all year, but you don't pitch every single game against the Yankees. You get a couple against the Royals and the Tigers and the Angels, who don't let Mike Trout. It's that great line. I've said it before, and I love it. Every time I think of this one from Sports Night, and I think about Mike Trout. It's the Barry Bonds line, and the woman talking to the sports reporter saying, the Giants are going to go all the way this year. What about Barry Bonds? And he says, well, unfortunately, the rules of baseball permit Barry Bonds from batting both before and after himself, and he probably can't play left field and pitch at the same time. And that's the game that we're in, right? Like that is the game that we're in. But when you have those guys, once you do have the other people who are hanging around to do it, they're tough to beat, man. I think this is the Yankees here, actually.
Yeah, it will certainly be interesting to see, because Yankees were only 2-8 against Tampa in the regular season. But if any team is going to make you say all bets are off, no pun intended here, since we're talking about DraftKings, it's the Yankees, and you're going to go, well, they'll find out a way. And there's bad blood between those two teams. There's some juice in between those two squads, and you would go like, well, I obviously everyone is maybe going to have an issue with the Yankees, but the Yankees have an issue with the Tampa Bay Rays. Yeah, they've got a little bit of swagger. They've got a lot of guys that can shove in that bullpen in a major way. And the Rays are also, loaded with former San Diego Padres players. Manny Margot hit one in the game 1. Hunter Renfroe hit one in game 2. So it's interesting that these ex-Padres players may go a lot longer in the postseason than the actual Padres, who are now down 1-0 going into Thursday night's game 2. Against Yadier Molina and the Cardinals. Yeah. They could be done before they even get started.
They could very well be done before they get started. And all those guys that they traded off in the 12 moves they made at the deadline are still out there playing baseball. How bizarre. Baseball, it's a funny game. And Patrick, you teed me up for that last thing that I wanted to talk about there, which was, of course, because I think of the broadcast in game one, there was an outpouring of just, of course, Yadier Molina is a Hall of Famer, and there has been some backlash to that sentiment, especially amongst, I think, the stat heavy crowd and on Twitter, a lot of the people that I've seen pointing out anything from his basic slash line to his WAR and how it's for whatever reason, I don't know, like who got together and decided the bullet point was going to be Jason Kendall. I don't know who dragged Jason Kendall into this fight.
He was a good catcher.
Like poor Jason Kendall. Like, why am I being used as the example of not a Hall of Famer? Like, what the heck, man? Did I ever do? But they have like roughly equal WARs, right? And so there's been this conversation of, is Yadier Molina a Hall of Famer? If so, is he a slam dunk Hall of Famer? And if so, why? And Patrick, I know you broached this subject on Twitter not that long ago, and also got a bit of pushback from the idea that Yadier Molina is a slam dunk Hall of Famer. And we should both start this caveat with something you said at the time and something I said to Jesse Spector again today on Twitter, which was, we can haggle over whether or not he should be. And that's a good conversation. We're about to have it. But let's all understand one thing very clearly. Yadier Molina is going into the Hall of Fame, and he's going in on the first ballot, almost certainly second ballot at the latest. And so we should understand why that's the case.
Yeah, precisely. If you're looking at it from a sabermetric perspective, there are guys that, maybe don't hold up when you start crunching the numbers and, manipulating them. And I think for the most part, those kind of analytics catch the guys that maybe are forgotten about, or like, look at Larry Walker. I mean, right. If it wasn't for the sabermetric community and really looking at what he was able to do, with his slash lines of batting average, on base percentage, and slugging, OPS plus, and all of those things, to put it in context, you go, oh, wow. All right. Well, he didn't hit 500 home runs, and all right. Yeah, he didn't get 3,000 hits, but wow, during his time, he really was one of the best players. Now, he might not have been the best player, but he was, when healthy, one of the best players at the time. And yeah, he missed a lot, but he was also there a lot. So it's, there are a lot of guys that get hurt and you go, they just didn't have long enough of a career, or there's just too many what ifs. Larry Walker still had the numbers there. If he was a little bit healthier, the numbers would have been there. There are guys that even if they were a little healthier, they would have only had half the numbers of Larry Walker. So you have to be healthy, you have to have longevity. But if you're missing maybe in those tabulating stats and those counting stats like Larry Walker did, we've got analytics to try to catch that. So it is interesting to look at Yadi's numbers and then say, oh yeah, I guess it's not like overwhelming, like according to Jaws, which is I love looking at Jaws, created by Jay Jaffe. And it's a system he created to, again, that's probably doesn't, it's not one size fits all, but it's a real good way of giving you an idea of where a player is, where, it combines a lot of different details from their, career WAR, their best 7 consecutive seasons. Cause you say, all right, well, look at Sandy Koufax. His numbers are, his career numbers, lack a little, to be wanted. Yeah. But he was so incredibly dominant when he did play that you go, all right, we can overlook that. And he's been like the one exception since he played like exactly 10 seasons. He looks at, Jaws looks at all-star game appearances, MVP voting, which is super important. And it doesn't actually take the postseason into it at all, which I think is one of the reasons why you say, well, he's 24th all time as a catcher. Dude's got 2 rings, takes the Cardinals, leads that pitching staff, takes them into the playoffs almost each and every year. And I think one of the stats that, really gets overlooked as far as helping a guy's case, I think in Todd Helton, this could hurt his case. And it's a real simple stat. This is one of the things that's hurting Todd Helton, but I think it won't be the be all end all. I think I think voters will eventually get over that. But the one stat I think that can help you is simply all-star game appearances. If you are voted in a lot, that means something, right? And we know guys get in maybe when they shouldn't. Brian LaHair, look him up. He was a guy who was an all-star for the Cubs once, but we're talking about the top end. So Todd Helton had 3 all-star appearances. Yeah. So you go, well, obviously he's not a Hall of Famer. Well, pump the brakes. Again, played in the National League during the steroid era at first base where there's always stars. Fred McGriff was another guy whose all-star appearances were really tamped down. But for Yadier Molina, he's been an all-star 9 times. I think even 7 consecutive seasons at one point. And there's only one guy ahead of him. Excuse me. There are 2 guys ahead of him that have had more all-star game appearances that are not in the Hall of Fame. One of them is Elston Howard, who eventually should get in. He was the first black player for the New York Yankees. I think he'll be, again, he can only get in via Veterans Committee. And 2 other guys that you hear talked about amongst the greatest of all time, Del Crandall and Bill Freehan, who was a great catcher with the Detroit Tigers during the 60s. And they will and may eventually get in. But you go down the list, a guy like Ted Simmons, he just got in through the Veterans Committee, only had 8 all-star game appearances. You can probably look and say, well, Brian McCann was a better catcher. He only had 7. So I don't know. It's a very simplistic stat, but I think it shows a lot to say, like, man, every year you're there, you're one of the best at your position. Yeah, maybe we're only talking about July, the beginning of July, but you were one of the best at your position consistently. All-star game appearances.
Yeah. I think one of the things, Patrick, that can often get lost in this conversation, and I pointed this out to somebody today, is like, look, if it was only about your statistics on the baseball field, we wouldn't need people to vote. There wouldn't be members of the BBWAA out there voting and creating a Hall of Fame. It would simply be, hey, did you post 50 or more or 55 or more career FWAR? Cool, you're in the Hall of Fame. Or did you have a slash line of X or better? Cool, then you're in the Hall of Fame. There's always going to be data to interpolate here. And there has also been always the conversations that while they bug me 100% of the time when they're used against people, like all-star game appearances, which equate to fame, right? It's all about the fame part of it as well. There is that element of people knowing who Yadier Molina is, him being not just on 2 world championship teams, but also on teams that were regularly a threat to win it. We're always in the postseason, and that he, just the biggest, the all-star games and the fame and all of that stuff that, would sort of drive me crazy when people say, well, they don't know who Todd Helton or Larry Walker were, or Derek Jeter did so much in the postseason, Larry Walker didn't. My position on that is, a lack of postseason appearances and or production should really not cost you in your baseball Hall of Fame case. But it should absolutely help you if you have it, if it's there. And I said that during the Jeter stuff, and I said that really does put any doubt about whether or not his middling numbers should put him into the Hall of Fame. So consistency says I've got to say the exact same thing about Yadier Molina, about whether all of that postseason stuff. Now, he wasn't great in the postseason. He wasn't bad either, but that's the hitting stuff. And look, you got to hit some, and he's had some great years at the plate, but everybody knows 2 things. One, Yadier Molina's biggest value comes from what he does behind the plate. And 2, we're still in our infancy. No matter how confident you are in a particular catcher stat to measure some part of the defense, if you really like framing stats, like bring me the person who's like really, really confident in framing stats. Even the people that use them know that we're getting closer, right? Like we don't, and we've talked about this a ton on the podcast when it comes to Tony freaking Walters, who deserves to be discussed about whether it's framing, throwing the ball down to any of the bases, working with your pitchers, studying opposing lineups, all the stuff that can't be measured. And, bring me the person who will say Yadier Molina wasn't elite at all of that. And that was his number one job.
But to jump in there, that's not just a facet of Yadier Molina. It's a facet of any catcher. Catcher. If Buster Posey and Joe Mauer are doing it at the plate, that probably, covers up any of the faults that they may have behind the plate. And you go, yeah, but look what he's doing at the plate. That is so unique. Even without that, you can look at what any catcher is doing behind the plate as their most important job. So it's not even just Molina. It's all catchers across the board.
Catcher. Right. And that's how, and that's why I would apply this exact same standard, and eventually will, to any catcher who would be considered for the Hall of Fame. And so somebody threw Joe Mauer actually at me today, and I was like, that's interesting. I've got to go and take a look at that. And I've got to study his defense a bit more, because I don't know as well. I do, as one, a National League guy, and two, look, throw all the shame on my face, whatever, as a former catcher, as a person who oftentimes watches the game from the perspective of that position particularly, and who just loves watching catchers, he's one of the greatest I've ever seen. He's probably the greatest defensive catcher of a generation. And I don't think that there's a stat that's going to back that up for you. But the fact that Adam Wainwright is still out there throwing complete games at 40 years old, and that they've had like 1,000 games together and all this stuff, like that stuff, that's not on accident. And he's not the only catcher to have done X, Y, and Z for no reason. He's so much a part of the success, of the perennial success of the St. Louis Cardinals. And so to boil down what his value to his team was, to his slash line or his WRC plus, or even to his WAR and stuff like that, I feel like, more than it does for other players, for a catcher, it's going to miss the point.
Yeah, he's, just so well respected in the game, and a lot of players have respect. But when you watch those videos when a guy gets into the Hall of Fame and the old timers are talking about a guy from their era who gets in, either Veterans Committee or otherwise, they say, man, this was the guy that when he came up, we were so afraid of him, this, that, and the other. And you go, wow, okay, like, sure, the Knights of the Keyboard, as Ted Williams called it, the Baseball Writers Association of America. You go, oh, just because those guys think that this player should be in the Hall of Fame, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. But when you hear Hank Aaron or Johnny Bench or Chipper Jones, any of those guys from any era talking about another player and with certain reverence, you go, oh, okay, yeah, all right, maybe this guy does belong. And I think that's the case with Yadier Molina for what he does as a leader in the clubhouse, on the field. And again, just the fact that every year you can almost count on him, making the All-Star game. And again, what he's doing behind the plate is a job as a catcher, that any catcher is just his consistency and being healthy. We've been talking about it this offseason with Ryan Maltapia and how and Nolan Arenado, how valuable it's been to be able to write their names in the lineup on an everyday basis, because they play hurt, they play banged up, and they have just this innate ability to not get themselves hurt enough to go on the IL. They're able to stick it out. Yeah. And Yadier Molina has been one of those guys where, he's going to be challenging the all-time record for innings and games behind the plate. Pudge Rodriguez, of course, has that one. So he's had over 2,000 games behind the plate, countless innings. And Joe Mauer was a guy you mentioned. He is at about 52% of his career as a catcher. So again, that's really no fault of his own that he had to move over to first base and spend some time as a DH. That is the one part of the argument where I go, I'm not sure how to contextualize that, because he was only a catcher for, a part of his career, a large part, right? Because it's 52%.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that he did win, 3 batting titles as a catcher, the only player to do it, snapping Ernie Lombardi's catching record.
I think he's borderline.
I think that's enough. I think he's going to get in. He's a guy that to me is borderline. But again, you talk to enough baseball people and you see the reverence they have for a guy like Joe Mauer. He's getting in. Maybe not first ballot, but I think like second. It'll
Also,
be
the
pretty soon.
mysticism, like people don't even realize too. Like people like Joe Mauer was a great 3, 4, 5 sport athlete. Like Joe Mauer could do anything. Like he was like guy was insane.
And now that I even think about it, like the argument against is like, well, man, I really wish he would have played more games as a catcher. How about Patrick? As I'm talking to myself,
Right.
dude, he had an ability to not just be competent behind the plate, but be very good defensively behind the plate. And then
at like 6'4" or some nonsense. How big
and,
is he? Yeah.
and then go out and be the best hitter in the American League.
Yeah.
Best hitter.
Yeah.
3 times led the league in batting average. No catcher has ever done that.
Nope.
So it's not as if, oh yeah, but after 12 seasons as a catcher, that's when you can officially, that's when you gain eligibility to win 3 batting titles. No, it's that singular season, and he was able to do that. So sure, yeah, he had to change positions, but I mean, that's why I think he's getting in. And he, again, might not have the numbers, might not be as flashy. And again, it was a shorter period of time, but that's the 2 different types of ways you can get in the Hall of Fame. Either you do it for a short amount of time at the top of your game, or you do it over a longer period of time towards the top, like a Craig Biggio, towards the top.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd have to vote for both of them. So, all right, I think that's going to wrap it up for us on a quicker one here today. I want to appreciate everyone for hanging out with us. I do want to plug something that I'm working on. You got to subscribe to the DNVR.com because I am pouring deep inside the numbers, stories, and narratives of one DJ LeMahieu. You may have heard of him before. You may have also heard that after moving on from the Colorado Rockies, he's become a much better baseball player and deserves much more accolades, not just because he's playing under the bright lights of New York City, but that he has somehow reinvented himself. And I'm here to tell you, friends, probably not. But check out all of the details on that. I've got lots of numbers and data and charts and pictures of ponies. And no, there's no pictures of ponies.
PowerPoint? Is this actually more of a PowerPoint than an article?
Yeah, it's basically, exactly right. Yeah, you got to come in, everybody sit in the dark, have a slice of day-old pizza, and I'm going to point up at the projector board and explain to you exactly why DJ LeMahieu might just be exactly the guy we've always known and loved, and why, even further, we've got to get better at this statistical understanding of Coors Field. So stay tuned for all of that. Make sure that you're subscribed to the DNVR.com. It's the only way you're going to be able to read this monstrosity of a piece that I'm putting together.
Drew, I got to ask you real quick.
Yeah.
Had a conversation with someone today on LeMahieu. Would you say probably, definitely not, or maybe DJ LeMahieu this offseason gets a 4-year, $25 million annual deal, $100 million contract?
Ooh.
Probably not, or maybe.
Maybe. I still think he'll get less than that. But maybe. I could see a team saying, maybe the thing is, I don't think he's viewed as a franchise shifter, and I don't think he should be. He's a great ball player, but
the Yankees would be the only team that would give him that money.
Exactly right. But maybe.
Okay.
But maybe.
Watch the ALCS, ALDS playoffs, and every hit or RBI that DJ LeMahieu has. So if he hits a home run, that's an extra $2 million you can add to the end. Right now, he's at about, I would say, 70.
Yeah.
So do the math, and you'll see where he's at.
Tacking him up. I think so. Well, if you want to keep up to date with all that, then you got to hang out with us on social media. You got to follow us at Patrick D. Lyons, at Drew Creasman, at DNVR_Rockies. You got to hang out with us and become a member of the thing. By the time you're hearing the podcast, the sale might be over. But if you're here on the live, go take advantage of the sale at DNVRLocker.com. A lot of stuff real cheap right now. Shirts, hats, masks, all that good stuff. Swing on by the DNVR bar sometime. Let them know. I think the Broncos are getting ready to play right now as we speak. So that's one live sporting event per week that we'll still have going on, but there'll still be sports on, man. There's still stuff. Appreciate you being absolutely awesome out there. I promise you that we will continue to be absolutely Patrick Lyons and Drew Creasman in here. And until next time, we will see you at the ballpark.